Welcome back to the Girls in Marketing podcast. This week, we're talking all about International Women's Day, diving into one of our favourite campaigns, See What She Sees, which highlights the stark differences in how men and women experience safety in public spaces. Plus, we've got all the latest marketing news. Could Instagram be launching a separate Reels app? Is Google reshaping the way we shop online with AI? And will LinkedIn's new connections-only feed change engagement on the platform? We're going to break it all down for you. Are you ready? Let's get into it. So, happy International Women's Day for last week.
Yeah, happy International Women's Day.
I thought that we should mention it and also talk about our favourite campaigns, because I actually did a post on LinkedIn last week that talked a lot about, International Women's Day is quite performative sometimes for a lot of companies, but it's about real action. It's about real change. So I did a post that said, if you want to support women in the workplace, you should do all of these things. And I listed about 15, 20 different things. So things like offer flexible working arrangements, create environments where women's voices feel heard, creating policies that support women through all different stages of life. But we've seen quite a few really interesting International Women's Day campaigns that we wanted to mention. So firstly, I wanted to talk about the Tony's Chocolonely's one, Lonely. So I always thought Tony's Chocolonely was Chocolonely, but it's Chocolonely.
Yeah.
So just to clarify.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's funny. I feel like so many people have that same misconception, don't they? But yeah, Tony's Chocolonely.
Lonely. So they have what they call the Tony's Chocolonely's Foundation, which is all about obviously giving back, and it's kind of like charitable sort of thing. They did an International Women's Day post which talked about cocoa growing regions and gender inequality in those kind of areas of the world and that sort of thing. Really, really interesting. They have partnered with this 100 Weeks for the last 8 years, which supports female entrepreneurship in multiple different places that are specifically there for kind of like cocoa growing regions and stuff like that. And every year they actually contribute 1% of their global revenue to the foundation that holds support for the 100 Weeks campaign. So I really enjoyed looking at this and understanding this. I actually didn't know that this is something Tony's Chocolonely's did, but really interesting to see them talking about it, to kind of support women in underprivileged areas of the world, especially in the likes of things like entrepreneurship, because you will probably think that that isn't something that, maybe these areas of the world would be really focused on, but actually it's so important.
Yeah, and I think what I love about it as well is that it's very aligned with Tony's Chocolonely as a brand anyway. They are very purpose driven. We know that, through the work that they do, that this campaign isn't something performative. It's not something that they've done just to say, oh, look how great we are on International Women's Day. It is so aligned with their values and their mission as a brand and what they do anyway, to call out kind of inequalities and exploitation in like the cocoa industry and in kind of all of the farming side of that. And, all of the work that they do is centered around that. And, they often, focus on campaigns that don't necessarily dig at other brands, but kind of call out bigger brands within, kind of the chocolate industry. Because, maybe they have less ethical practices, or they, use less ethical sourcing with their cocoa and stuff like that. So I really like that campaign, because I definitely think it's a lovely angle that they've taken on focusing on that particular aspect for International Women's Day, but definitely aligned with all of the work that they do. And, we're big, well, I'm definitely a big Tony's Chocolonely fan. I know that we've spoken about them and their campaigns a lot before. So yeah, I really, really love that one. One that I wanted to mention, another International Women's Day campaign that I loved, was the See What She Sees campaign by Forsman and Bodenfors. So I don't know whether our listeners might be familiar with some of their other campaigns. So CPB London have previously done campaigns such as Imagine a World and also Change the Narrative. So the Imagine a World campaign that was from a few years ago now was one that was basically kind of, it was billboards and things like that that you could see around like London, for example. And it was imagine a nurse. Is it a woman? Imagine a CEO. Is it a man? Very, very thought-provoking, really challenging our unconscious bias, really challenging that notion of, kind of gender stereotypes that we have. They've also done a campaign previously, Change the Narrative, which was kind of, a man is assertive, a woman is bossy, and it's kind of looking at the comparisons of how you would describe a man or a woman in kind of the same situation with the same behaviours. And this year, their campaign, See What She Sees, it kind of focuses on the way in which women see certain situations, so how they perceive safety, which was really interesting. And there are a couple of stats that I just wanted to mention from the campaign. 7 in 10 women worry about being followed or harassed when alone in public versus only 44% of men. And 2 in 3 women say that safety fears limit their social and professional lives versus just over half of men. And again, in a similar kind of style to their previous campaigns, they've been kind of like big billboard style campaigns. And they've had things like, there was one that was like on the tube that had, on the one side was Mind the Gap and on the other side was Mind the Rub, kind of emphasising the women's fear of kind of sexual harassment and things like that on public transport. There was one that was a picture of a cocktail. On the one side it says cheers and with like an exclamation mark. And on the other side it said spiked ? Because again, women's fears around safety, it's how women perceive particular situations. And one that I really liked actually was a large picture of a mobile phone, and on one side it said mobile device and on the other side it said self-defense device, which I think was really interesting. And particularly, and they emphasised this in their campaign, since I don't know if you remember when it wasn't too long ago when Saoirse Ronan was on the Graham Norton show with Paul Mescal and Eddie Redmayne, and it was just kind of a really light-hearted conversation. They were talking about making films, and I think Eddie Redmayne, or possibly, can't remember, Paul Mescal, mentioned that they had some sort of like training for whatever film it was about like how to use a mobile device as like a self-defense like implement. And they were kind of laughing and they were all sort of joking as if to say like, oh, can you ever imagine thinking of having to use your mobile phone as a self-defense device? Like, oh, imagine I'm on the phone to my mum, like, oh, sorry, mum, just gotta whatever. And then Saoirse Ronan just kind of pops in and she's like, oh yeah, like women have to think about that all the time, don't we? And it kind of like silenced the room a little bit, but it was such an impactful moment in, you know, in just kind of our like pop culture that went hugely viral on TikTok, and everyone was sort of talking about it. And I think that really emphasised exactly what this campaign is trying to demonstrate, you know, the differences in how men and women sometimes do perceive particular situations from a safety perspective. So I just thought that was a really good one. And as always, I think they execute it really well visually. So yeah, that was one I wanted to highlight and just kind of mention.
I think they always work with kind of charities or impactful kind of organisations to do that, especially. And you know, a lot of people think International Women's Day, they think, oh, discount codes and all of this sort of thing. But actually that sort of work is really essentially changing narrative. You know, we've talked previously about the other campaigns that have happened in previous years, but I did really like this one because it is so true. And I often kind of think, especially from a perception of society, I think if you personally aren't going through something, then you often don't understand. So that kind of stark contrast, and they do tend to take that stance of like something and then something else. So obviously with this one, it was, you know, the kind of like cheers and the spiked sort of thing. It's so stark that it stops you in your tracks. And I can imagine, I haven't seen this from an out of home perspective. I've only seen it online. But if I was to see that in, you know, in real life, it'd be like, oh, what is that? And I know that would be the case for so many people, no matter what their gender was. So hopefully this has been a big thing in terms of like actually getting to the point where people feel, okay, you know, there are certain things that, you know, maybe women have to do that other like men don't have to really think about.
Yeah.
So I do really love that. And I think that is everything, both that one and the Tony Chocolonely's campaign is everything that International Women's Day is about. I've seen so many posts on LinkedIn that say, we don't need International Women's Day. You know, what's the point in it? It's for nothing. But the truth is that there is a reason for it. And I think we will continue to need it as long as things like this exist and campaigns like this help us to move forward and really move the needle towards something that we want to be as a society. Yeah,
absolutely. I totally agree. And I definitely think that, you know, continuing to see these campaigns, and sometimes the campaigns are also pretty hard hitting, and I think that's needed. I think sometimes, you know, particularly things like this to bring awareness to topics not only for women, because what I also don't really like, and I think I've seen a lot of conversation around this as well, is that a lot of the time International Women's Day is targeted at women. And I think that's great and we want to celebrate women, but actually International Women's Day it should be targeted at everyone, and if not more so at people who aren't women, because it's about getting everybody on board with and aware of kind of the inequalities that women face, or, you know, what needs to be done to kind of to reach the point that we're not nowhere near yet. Another one that I just quickly wanted to mention was the Refuge Red Flag campaign. So interesting, because Refuge are obviously a charity, so I think it's also interesting to think about this campaign from a slightly different perspective. This one actually they have executed as an actual installation in London, which they actually had on International Women's Day last week. But it was basically focusing on red flags and basically highlighting the fact that no red flag is too small or too insignificant. And it was an in-person display of numerous, lots and lots and lots of different red flags with different kind of things written on them. And yeah, it's highlighting that thing of, you know, I think the statistic was 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence. And it's highlighting the fact that domestic violence doesn't have to just be typically what you would expect it to be. So I think one of the red flags said something like, you know, he never physically hurt me, but, and there were so many other things that actually were, you know, still deemed to, are still considered to be domestic violence and abuse. You know, he never physically hurt me, but everything I bought had to be seen, my clothing, what I'd wear, you know, it's that control. And I do think that, you know, these sorts of things, he'd drive so fast up to a red light and then brake suddenly, giving me whiplash. It's basically highlighting the kind of micro things that often happen that actually can be really abusive in a relationship towards women. And I really like the way that they executed it. I always do think that kind of executions with a really impactful physical display are really good, but then also it had that ability to kind of be spread quite widely online as well. So I think that the duality of that campaign was really impactful, and I really, really like that one. Obviously it has a super important message.
Yeah, especially leaning into the whole like red flag sort of trend, because that has definitely done its rounds. You know, there's been the whole like red flag, beige flag sort of thing on social media. Yeah. Really interesting that is the kind of stance that they've taken, because I think a lot of the time I've spoken to people on our podcast before that talk about how you can make something like, for example, an installation or something that's out of home go sort of viral online as well, because that's kind of the measure of success these days, isn't it? If you're able to go viral online as well as kind of putting it out there to the world. So I think leaning into the whole red flag kind of, not trend, but that whole red flag movement.
Yeah, that discourse around like red flags in men, or beige flags, like you say.
It is amazing to see, you know, a charity kind of getting on board with that as well, because it's almost kind of leaning into the kind of younger generations as well, you know, people who might understand red flags, and then also people older who would also as well. So yeah, no, I really love that. And I think it's really nice to see charities, especially women-focused charities, getting involved and being able to, obviously, as you say, flip the script and make sure that it's not just targeted at women, it's targeted towards everyone, really, because I think it is really important.
Yeah.
So now we've talked about International Women's Day, let's go on to what's new, what's happening in marketing. So there are quite a few things that we wanted to talk about. The first thing I wanted to mention is that Instagram could be launching a separate Reels app. So Instagram's not wasting any time at all in kind of seizing the TikTok fame. There is this whole kind of, obviously there was an uncertain time around TikTok being banned and stuff like that. We obviously covered it a few episodes ago. Now there's this whole sort of discourse around potentially Instagram launching a separate Reels app. Personally, I don't know how I feel about it. I think, you know, obviously we've seen Instagram, we've seen Meta create Threads, which was off the back of obviously X, and Twitter turned into X and everything like that. So now it's like they're potentially creating a whole separate app for Reels.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot, isn't it? It also comes after the Edits app, which was also kind of a way that they were trying to kind of overtake CapCut, you know, from like the TikTok editing perspective. So yeah, Edits being like a video editing app to use alongside Instagram, but also now apparently alongside Reels as well. I don't know. I think that we have as consumers probably, well, we've become quite used to consuming static images and video in the one app. Even TikTok has lent into having, static scrollable like carousels and stuff on there, slightly different format and kind of still more in line with that, vertical feed of predominantly video. But I agree with you. I just don't really know how much value there will be. And I don't know if people are wanting to add more apps to their phones. I just don't know if that's what people are wanting to do. I saw a statistic, I can't remember where it was from, but I saw a statistic, it might have been from Sprout Social's recent social media stats report, that I think in 2024, average daily phone use was down slightly on 2023. Potentially, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for this that there could be, but potentially people are being a little bit more intentional with how they use their time on their phones. And does that actually lend itself to people wanting to download more new apps to use them in separate places? It's an interesting one, definitely. I would like to see where it goes, but are people becoming fatigued with so many new apps? Do they want to have all of these different apps? One for their static posts and their photos, and one for their videos. And I don't know how well it'll do, to be honest. But
yeah, it will be interesting to see the kind of future of that.
Yeah.
So also want to talk about Google expanding its AI shopping element.
Mm-hmm.
So I find this one really interesting. So this is where Google is adding more generative AI sampling tools, which essentially will give consumers a way to virtually try on items, which, can I just say, I love as a consumer. Mm-hmm. I am a sucker for a bit of AR. I was going to say AR. I love it when, for example, recently, literally yesterday, I was buying a new piece of furniture for my office, and I was like, I just don't know how this will look in the room. So I got up IKEA's website. They have an AR ability on the website, and I placed it in the room, and I was like, yeah, actually, I'm not sure on that colour, and that sort of thing. So it's really interesting to see Google adding more of the generative AI stuff, especially kind of leaning into trying on clothes. I always think I'm sometimes hesitant to buy things online because I think, I'm not sure what that will look like on me, or there's a whole kind of colour theory analysis that's around at the moment. I'm not sure if that colour will be nice or what's the reality of how that will look on me and my body. And, you can look at things like models and see, but ultimately looking at it on your body is really important, I think, as a consumer. So that, I thought, is quite a good one from kind of Google, I would say.
Definitely. I think what I also read about it was that I think it's interesting that there's going to be, or there are more options rolling out where you can kind of search for a product and then it'll generate kind of like an AI version of this product based on the description that you've kind of put in, and then also pull up some like real world products that you can buy. So it's kind of like a starting from scratch, like this is the kind of thing I want, and it's starting to kind of create AI versions and then provide you like purchasing options as well. So, this is kind of the AI thing that we've generated, and these are some real world things that you might want. It's interesting. I did a webinar last week with Pion, who are very much focused on Gen Z and Gen Z marketing. And one of the kind of conversations that we had in the webinar chat was about whether students and kind of that generation are going to be leaning more towards online purchasing or kind of wanting to kind of still have that in-store offline experience. But it'll be interesting to see how features like this from Google, like virtual try on and, virtual, you can try like virtual makeup styles on yourself, like soft glam, like you can see what that looks like on you to see what that looks like. So it'd be interesting to see how this kind of alters people's kind of purchasing preferences, whether it's going in store for experiences or whether they'd prefer to do these sorts of things online. So yeah, it's an interesting option. I just don't know whether what the demand is for that sort of thing. But like you say, I can definitely see it for me from like a furniture perspective. I think it would be interesting to see how accurate like things like clothing try on is, like what that actually looks and feels like. Because I also think it's not just about what something looks like. I think it's also how you feel in it. And I don't know that you necessarily get that from like an online AI try on tool. So it'd be interesting to see like how good that experience is.
It reminds me of, I think it was, don't quote me on this, but I think maybe Charlotte Tilbury had a filter on TikTok in the last few months that was about their kind of foundation. I think it was Charlotte Tilbury. I could be wrong, where you would essentially try on the filter, which is the different to find your shade of foundation. Now, I heard mixed reviews about people saying, oh yeah, I found my perfect shade, or oh no, it's, it was awful. It got the total wrong shade for me, because I think now we're seeing such a rise in people shopping online.
Yeah.
People virtually shop everything online, especially things like TikTok Shop or Google Shopping. I think we need something to show us, especially with the things like, as you say, with clothes or makeup, that actually makes a difference, that you can say, oh yeah, especially like shades of foundation.
Yeah.
So hard to buy foundation online.
Yeah.
I would only ever buy something like foundation or lipstick online if I've already seen it in store and I've physically either put it on my hand or put a bit on my face or something like that. So again, interesting.
And I
to
think
see
there'll
that
probably
happening.
be quite a lot of trial and error with this sort of stuff, won't there? Because I can imagine with something like an AI tool or filter to kind of pick that, your shade, those sorts of things are going to have to be really refined, because you take a photo of yourself and in one lighting you're probably one shade, and another lighting you're another shade, and it depends on the texture of your skin that day and all sorts of things like that. So I definitely think there's so much potential. It's just, I imagine we'll see it be refined and perfected as time goes on, and who knows, we might just do everything like that online. Oh, it's scary.
It gives me remember Ready Player One, the film? Did you ever see that? Where he lives in like a virtual world. It's years from now. I mean, it's not massively dissimilar to the reality that we're living in.
Stop it.
I absolutely loved that film when it came out, but it felt like a million miles away. And then now people are using filters to try on makeup. I'm like, actually.
But it's been happening like relatively gradually, that you don't see it as like a huge, like complete shift to that type of living. But we're on our way.
So LinkedIn, we always like to give a little shout out to LinkedIn.
Little LinkedIn
update. They are testing a alternative feed of updates from only your connections. Now, I wanted to mention this because I think a lot of people are getting fed up with some aspects of LinkedIn that are showing them maybe posts that they aren't interested in. I think LinkedIn do a lot of experimentation. They're always trialing different things, experimenting, A/B testing. We've all seen it. So this essentially means that LinkedIn is testing out a new way to potentially drive more engagement. It's giving users the option to switch to a feed of only updates from people in your kind of connection network, your first degree network. So a previous study conducted by LinkedIn themselves shown that users find content posted by their feed the most engaging, while LinkedIn members are also statistically more likely to engage with content shared by colleagues, both former colleagues and current colleagues. So I think off the back of that research, they're now thinking, okay, we want to give people the option. Now, I personally really like this. I think having the option to change is interesting. Now, something I love is going through my feed and seeing new people, new posts, connecting with new people, liking, reacting or commenting to people that maybe I've never seen before. However, I always find it really difficult to just find people that I know's post. Something like, for example, you'll have posted and I will never see it. And then I'll be like, oh yeah, you posted yesterday. And then I'll be like literally on your profile looking at it. You posted for International Women's Day. That didn't come up in my feed. I had to literally go over to your profile and see that. So I think having the option to switch between is a really good one, because you can do that on TikTok, can't you?
Well, I was actually going to say that, and I think it's interesting because obviously you have that option on TikTok of like your For You page, but then the people that you follow. And I think it's interesting because LinkedIn are obviously taking a step in the opposite direction of that. So they are, like you say, introducing like a My Network sort of feed, which is just kind of your first connections or whatever they're called. And moving away from that kind of like algorithm driven, we think you'll like this, and just like this is literally the people that you're following. I think it's an interesting contrast. I mean, it'd be interesting to know, when you use TikTok, do you use your For You page or do you predominantly look at the people that you follow?
I do both.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
Yeah, so I predominantly use the For You page, but sometimes I get a bit fed up with it. So I just switch over to friends and go, oh, I'll just have a little look, or friends, or also following, because they have the friends option. I think sometimes they were taking that away and putting that back. The friends option is obviously people who follow you and who you follow,
Yeah.
but also like obviously the people that you just follow, because often sometimes people I follow don't come up in my For You page. I think obviously again TikTok's always experimenting, so I do swap between the two, and I think LinkedIn introducing this option, I would probably do the same. I like the option of seeing new things, new content, but I equally like seeing the people that I'm, connected with, the people that I'm friends with, actually posting and supporting them. Because that's something as well that I don't really love sometimes about Instagram, like the feed of Instagram. I don't really find myself scrolling through my Instagram feed anymore because there's so many posts that aren't related to me, that aren't people I follow. They're just either ads or they're random people, and it's just you might like this sort of post. I love stories. I well prefer that because it's people that obviously I'm connected to, that I'm friends with, or that I know. So I think I would use both. What do you think?
Yeah, I think potentially the same. And I think it'll be interesting to see what people's verdict is, because I have, like you said, I have definitely seen a lot of people recently actually expressing the want for something like that and saying like LinkedIn's becoming too flooded with people that I'm not interested in seeing. So it'll be interesting to see what the response is.
We absolutely love recording the podcast, but it's great to know what you think of the episodes too. Come and join our broadcast channel on Instagram to get involved in the chat. Let us know what you think of the episodes and what you want to hear more of.
Just one other update that we wanted to mention is Meta's introduction of community notes. So they've obviously moved away from the third-party fact-checking model and now are introducing something similar to what X have done with community notes, which is kind of more of a community-led moderation kind of option for their social media. So users being able to add a 500-character note to kind of explain why they don't like a piece of content or what their concern is. So this is, I think, an interesting move that they're making. But I think it'll be interesting to see how this works kind of as an alternative to third-party fact-checking. And also one thing that I did read, which is definitely a really interesting and valid point, is that for these community notes to actually be published anywhere, there has to be kind of consensus for them to be approved. So in theory, what they're doing is removing the third-party fact checkers to allow for people, with different beliefs, ideologies, and that sort of thing to be able to kind of have their say on moderation. But then that in itself means that a lot of the time the notes aren't actually being approved. I mean, I saw a statistic that said that on X, I think it was on X, 73% of community notes related to political topics are never actually displayed, despite them providing valuable context, because there isn't enough agreement to actually publish those notes. So I think it sounds like a great alternative, but in practice, whether or not it's actually having any impact, I'm not really sure.
And I also think that these community notes are mainly for understanding if there are things that are potentially wrong, or it works very well, I think, on X, and also will work well on Facebook for things like political or economic things that are going on in the world. But I actually think sometimes from maybe like a brand perspective, as long as you're not creating content that is particularly political or anything that people would have a sort of opinion on, I don't think that it's something people need to worry about too much. I think it's just something to understand and know that is being rolled out. I know that it has been quite helpful from an X perspective. I do still have X on my phone. I do scroll it every now and again. I used to use Twitter a lot for kind of news stuff. I now just kind of use it to have a look what's going on in the world generically, not necessarily to find out news. And sometimes I think the community notes are interesting. There'll be a certain video and underneath it'll say, this video is not right, this didn't happen, or, this actually happened instead, or something like that. Or if it's a clip or a quote, it'll add the context to that, which sometimes I think is so important.
Yeah.
Adding, especially if you, even things like podcast clips, like we love creating a podcast clip, but sometimes the wider context is really important for something like that. So it'd say, oh, this person said they hate so-and-so, but the context of this is they then said, but they love this or something like that. So I think Meta introducing this, obviously following X's model, I think it's a good thing to have, but I wouldn't necessarily say as marketers we need to think too much into it unless we work or exist in some in it, like more of a kind of politically inclined sort of brand or company or organization or something like that.
Yeah.
So on to industry research. There's one main piece of research we wanted to talk about today, which is Marketing Week's Thrive in 2025, which, can I just say, I love that. I love that rhyme. Annual Digital Advertising Trends Report.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few stats. I think it's good to just read over the stats and let's have a little chat about it.
Yep.
54% of marketers agree that multi-channel strategies will be a focus this year. 58% of marketers will increase YouTube spend in 2025, and 74% of marketers plan to use conversational ads, so things like DMs, SMS in 2025, and 90% of marketers are using automation in their campaigns, which, can I just say, I love that for people because I am a massive automation girly. I love promoting and encouraging people to use automation as much as possible. I know it's not 100% reliable, but especially people who maybe are solo marketers or work in small marketing teams, automation is a lifesaver. So the fact that 90% of marketers are using it means that there's only 10% more that I have to convert, which I love. And 84% of marketers agree that search is becoming more visual, making high quality content essential. So let's break the stats down a little bit. Multi-channel strategies.
Yeah.
People are saying it's important, but it's always been important.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm surprised that only 54% of marketers agree that multi-channel strategies will be a focus for them for this year. I think that's fairly low. I would have expected it to be higher than that. I wonder whether that's, I mean, I suppose it'd be interesting to know who the pool of marketers are that responded to this. Maybe that's people who work in companies where, I don't know, maybe the marketing departments are quite siloed and so multi-channel isn't necessarily something that they do. But I do think that for a long time now, multi-channel strategies have been a growing focus, and I think the impact of them has been seen. And I think that, you know, companies that do have that model internally where their marketing teams are set up to execute well, multi-channel strategies when it comes to their marketing do reap the rewards. So I'm surprised that's not a higher statistic, to be honest. But yeah, definitely an interesting one. 58% of marketers increasing YouTube spend in 2025. I mean, we spoke about YouTube on the last podcast episode, didn't we? And about kind of where YouTube is going or where it's not going. I definitely think it's around to stay. I think it's seen its fair share of rivals coming into the space, but never really pushing it out of where it is. I think that, you know, the likes of TikTok have grown massively in kind of short form content, but I don't think YouTube's going anywhere. And I think that brands particularly are seeing the value of that, you know, just because TikTok's a newer platform and it's maybe spoken about a bit more when it comes to the marketing world. I don't think that it's necessarily the platform for all brands. I think there's so much value in YouTube and where it's going and the new features that it's introducing. So I'm not surprised that more marketers are kind of maybe thinking about spending some of their ad spend there.
It is quite a high statistic though. I think 58%.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know if that is 58% of marketers who are currently using YouTube spend are increasing, because they said will increase.
Okay.
Or also
just marketers in general.
If it's marketers in general. I don't actually know the kind of pool of people that was kind of surveyed for this. But yeah, I agree, because I think people need to start diversifying a little bit more with ad spend, and YouTube is a really good place. I often don't really see, you know, marketers using YouTube as an ad spend platform. We obviously speak a lot to marketers all the time, and the main platforms I tend to see people talking about is Meta and Google, but I don't really see people talking about YouTube too much. So hopefully we are going to see more people do that, because I really think people are engaged with ads on the platform. I actually know YouTube as well, I think it was last week, have started or have introduced or will introduce a light mode. So at the moment they have YouTube Premium, which you pay for and you get no ads at all. But that, I think, I want to say is around £10 a month or something, or it might be a little bit more, maybe £15 a month. They're introducing a light version of that, which is less money, but it means that you don't get ads on normal videos, but you get ads on music videos, I think. So I seen that because actually it was a funny conversation between me and my fiance, because he said, oh, we pay for YouTube Premium, but we don't use it for music because we use Spotify for music. So actually we could transfer to this new light subscription because we don't need we don't need the ads in normal YouTube videos. But because we don't really like watching the ads on normal YouTube videos, but we don't use YouTube for music, if that makes sense. So again, interesting to see YouTube bringing out that sort of thing. I don't know if they've brought it out or if they considering it or something like that, but we were just having that conversation around that as well. So yeah, I mean, always interesting to see YouTube being a bit more of a thing of topic.
Yeah. I think the statistic around conversational ads, DMs, SMS, more of that impersonal marketing is interesting, that 74% of marketers said that they plan to use conversational ads more. I definitely think we've seen a growth in appetite for things like broadcast channels and, consumers feeling that they are part of, maybe a brand's community. But I don't know, things like DMs, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? I don't know if you saw a campaign recently. Was it IKEA? I don't know if I'm remembering this wrong, but I think it was IKEA, where they did a campaign where they DM'd people to say, "Are you up?" or something.
Okay.
And then if people respond, I think it was IKEA. And if they responded, then they were sending them like recommendations for like IKEA beds or something like that. Okay. I could be wrong there, but go away and look at it. It was something like that. And that was like quite a creative campaign that, was targeting people via DM. And then, it was spoken about a lot. Obviously, I didn't receive a DM, but it was spoken a lot about.
Are you up, baby?
It was spoken about a lot online. And again, it was that kind of, targeting that. I don't know how they went about targeting their audience. I don't know what kind of pool of people they used. I don't know whether it was automated. I don't know any of that stuff. But again, an example of kind of DMs. Don't know about you. I personally don't love SMS ads from brands. They're not really my thing. We've had this conversation, actually, me and you, recently, about what the apps that we use to communicate on our phones. And I definitely use WhatsApp more so than I use kind of like iMessage. So often when I do get an iMessage, an SMS or whatever it is, it usually is, when it's coming to my text app, I kind of know it's really going to be off a brand. I don't really use them for anything else. So I don't know. I don't really love them. I don't know that it's dependent on the industry, it's dependent on your audience, but I don't know it's somewhere I'd necessarily be focusing my ad spend. But I do think that in some ways, more personalisation is important. It's just not taking statistics like that and running with them and going, 74% of marketers are going to do SMS, so we've got to do SMS. Like, still consider if it's right for your brand, still consider if it's what your audience want. I don't know that people are necessarily like running away from email marketing en masse. I think email marketing done well is still so impactful. So I think you've got to consider where it's worth putting your time. But it's an interesting statistic that marketers are doing.
I think if I got a DM from a brand like IKEA and said, are you up or are you awake? I'd be like, what the hell?
Yeah. I'd be like,
who's messaging me?
Yeah, what's this spam account?
Yeah, I do wonder how they did their targeting for that campaign, because I'd be like, yeah, maybe I am awake, but what's it got to do with you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We've seen a lot of more conversations happening in the DMs though, because I don't know if you've seen, there used to be a thing years ago where people would say like, reply this thing and I'll send you whatever. There's now tools that help you automate that. So for example, if you said, reply podcast on this clip and we'll send you a link to the podcast.
And then it's automated.
And I love that. I don't think that is necessarily what this stat is talking about, which is conversational ads necessarily. But I think more marketers are putting money into things like that, which is the automation aspect of things, where you say, comment this and we'll send you this thing. And it could be like a product or, something like that. I love that. And I actually do think that starts conversations with people, especially on the likes of Instagram. But yeah, I definitely agree in terms of SMS. I'm not sure it's dead per se, and maybe it's just that we're not necessarily the demographic for SMS. It could be that, you know, there are people, because it's still successful, right? So there are people who are utilizing SMS. I think it's good sometimes for notification stuff. So for more stuff of like, this is coming up, like a reminder, because SMS always pops up at the top of my phone. I don't necessarily read it. But, you know, for example, if it was like Moonpig and they were like, oh, this person's birthday's coming up, I think I quite like that from an SMS perspective. I don't know if I would click on the link in an SMS, but it would remind me.
Yeah.
And then I would potentially shop with that brand.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think actually, I think the one brand that does generally get me on SMS is Domino's usually, because I think they do it at the right time. It's usually a Friday evening, which is when I'm most likely to want a Domino's. Again, I'd never click into the SMS itself and go via that link.
But it reminds you.
But it reminds me, and then often I do order it. So I suppose that works on some kind of level.
Yeah.
So time for the Your Questions Answered section. So every week or every episode, we get a marketing expert to send us a voice note answering a question that we've had in from the community. So this week we've got Leela Jackson, who is creative director at CNS Media. And we asked Leela, do you have any creative ways to measure the impact of campaigns that are kind of typically more difficult to measure? So for example, campaigns that have maybe an objective that's based on brand awareness or communicating a specific message. So this could be maybe like a charity or non-profit sector campaign or something along those lines. Any creative ways to measure those sorts of things? So let's hear from Leela.
I will play that now.
So this is something I get asked a lot, working in social and branding and creative. Not all our campaigns are sales driven. A lot of them are awareness driven. So how do you track those metrics? How do you track if a campaign's performing well? For me, it's all about pre and post campaign analysis. And in particular, I'd say around your social media platforms and your website, with maybe a bit of search thrown in there too. So before the campaign's gone live, I want all the data. I want to know how many followers you've got, what your engagement rates are, what your website traffic's like, how long's the dwell time, when are people kind of clicking, what are they doing, how long are they spending on site? And then you need to compare those metrics with whilst the campaign is live and post-campaign. So for example, you could really have an increase in followers, you could have an increase in engagement rates. And on your website, are people engaged more? Are they kind of landing on specific pages? Have your bounce rates gone down? Has your dwell time gone up? All those are great indicators of people being engaged with your brand. Also, Google search, it's completely free. It's a great tool. So let alone just measuring maybe your campaign names and around that, but also your search volume of your brand name, is that gone up throughout the campaign? Like, what are kind of the metrics around that? I feel like these are really like key indicators. You can also use like Brand Watch and other things like that for social listening, but it's less about, I think, the tools and more about that key analysis. Have you checked everything? Is all the data done before? And then comparing that exact data with after the campaign to kind of see its success.
Love that.
Yeah.
And I think it is so true. A lot of marketers forget to do, especially pre-campaign analysis. They will just dive into a campaign and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. But they won't actually do a full audit first. So doing that, I think, is really important. And it will mean you'll be able to see success. Leela obviously mentioned doing it during and also post-campaign as well. Which again, I think when you're in the moment and you're thinking of everything around the campaign, you forget to do that, you know, analysis during the campaign and whilst that's running. So yeah, I definitely think that's a handy tip for everyone.
Yeah, and I think especially I think what can be difficult is particularly marketers who are maybe one-person marketing teams, or they're in smaller teams, or they maybe don't have the resource that they'd like to conduct these sorts of things, is not putting too much pressure on yourself to, you know, do super in-depth audits, but doing something. So pick, you know, a couple of things like what Leela's mentioned and focus on those things pre, during and after. So don't set yourself the ambitious task of auditing absolutely everything about your business before a campaign, during it and after it, because it's likely to not happen. And what you'll do is you'll do it before, you'll get all the data you need, and then you won't have the time to do it during and after, and then it'll be kind of a wasted exercise. So focus just on a couple of things pre, during and after to set as markers that you know that you will track, and it'll make it a more manageable task for you, particularly if you don't have a lot of support, and hopefully give you something measurable suitable for, you know, those campaigns that, like Leila said, are not super sales driven, or you know, they don't have necessarily really obvious KPIs or metrics to track. So I think that's really, really good advice.
No, yeah, that's a really good one. I would also say off the back of that, making sure that they're as aligned as possible with things like business goals or like overall marketing goals, because don't just pick a certain metric because you think, oh, well, followers will increase, so I'll make sure I pick followers. Pick something that actually makes a difference. If you're doing a campaign for brand awareness, if you're doing it for lead gen, whatever you're doing it for, make sure that the metric directly correlates with that. And at the end of the day, it might be good, it might increase or it might decrease, whatever the goal is, but you've got to be honest with yourself. Don't just pick a metric because it looks pretty or because you think you should. You've got to create and choose a metric because it is actually something that is worth measuring for the campaign.
Yeah, definitely agree. So for the final section, we normally chat about some of our favourite campaigns or some like favourite marketing moments, don't we? But I feel like quite a lot of our favourite campaigns we've already discussed, because our recent favourite campaigns have been, you know, really centred around International Women's Day, like we mentioned. So I think maybe if we just touch on a couple of other marketing moments or brands that we've been loving, or even necessarily not loving, but just kind of conversation pieces to have a chat about to round things off.
We've got to mention the PLT rebrands.
Yeah.
It has been the hot topic of the last week or so, or just over a week. Now, I think for me, I'm quite neutral on it, right? So I've seen some people who absolutely hate it, and I've seen people who absolutely love it. I know that there are people who have quite strong opinions. Personally, I have never really been a consumer of PLT. I have never purchased from their website. I wouldn't say I am necessarily a fan of their brand or a part of their community. So I think I'm looking at it from an external perspective, looking in. I think from an external looking in, that again isn't part of the community, it was quite rogue. Like I didn't expect PLT to do a rebrand. I think they've got the positioning that they've got. They've done a lot to get there. So to just completely 180 and change the whole brand is quite like, it's quite a big deal, I would say. And I think it's caused a lot of controversy because of the fact that I don't know if people really seen it coming. Potentially people who are part of the community, who are fans of PLT, maybe did see it coming. But personally, as an outsider, I didn't. So that happening, obviously we've seen it unfold because they I think they archived or deleted all of their posts on Instagram, and they took their website down, and then they had this thing saying like legacy in progress, and then it was a date, I think it was the 3rd of March maybe. So, yeah. And then that's when obviously they announced the rebrand off the back of it. I do think they've lent into burgundy because burgundy is a moment at the moment. It is a moment. Everyone loves burgundy. Every product I see is bringing out a burgundy colour in some sort. So they definitely lent into that. But I personally think that it is what it is, right? They've obviously decided to do it for a reason. I just think it's a very crazy thing to do, personally.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I wouldn't say I'm neutral on it, to be honest, but not to go into my own super personal feelings on it. I think it's interesting, and some of the conversation and the discourse about it that I've seen online, I think has been that, so a lot of people disagree with PLT, or even prior to the rebrand, they didn't necessarily agree with PLT's maybe ethics or the way that they go about sourcing their materials, paying their workers, that sort of thing. But a lot of the discourse I see around that, those sorts of people don't purchase from PLT, right? They're not your customers anyway. They're not your customers. They're probably never likely to be, unless you were to do a huge rebrand around those ethics and those values and you completely shifted away from that. So for me, if they were going to do a rebrand for the purposes of winning that audience, that should have been, or you would have expected that to be kind of the rebrand that they do. For their audience that they had, I've seen quite a few people actually posting saying things like, oh, PLT was the brand that I used to get like my outfits for going to the rave, or my festival outfits, or like my outfits for like these particular things, like, you know, my Freshers Week outfits. And then I actually saw someone shared a screenshot. They'd searched rave on the new PLT site, and it had come up with like, you know, kind of Odd Muse-esque, Club London-esque dresses. And like, I just don't know that that's what they were looking for. So then I'm kind of like seeing people saying, well, I was your existing customer, I was your previous customer, but now I don't know what I would buy from you, because the things that you're now selling, I have brands that I'm loyal to for those things. You were my brand for my rave outfits and my festival outfits, but you're not anymore because you've shifted what you're selling. So then I just don't know, have they alienated who their audience was? Because, you know, whether or not other people externally agreed with or disagreed with their ethics and their values, they did have a core audience of people, I think. Yeah. So in shifting away from that, have you alienated those people who shopped at you for those things? And now you're selling things that are similar to other brands who maybe those customers would go elsewhere for. So like, I don't know, have they made the waters of who their audience is and what their product is more murky through the rebrand? I'm just not sure, to be quite honest. I just don't know. And I think it was a bit of a, like you said, it was a bit rogue. It was a bit unexpected.
Yeah.
One thing's for sure is there's been a lot of conversation, good or bad. People have been speaking about it, so that's something.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think there's a reason that they've done it, right?
Yeah, of course. So, and obviously we're not necessarily privy to all of the decision-making process.
Exactly. And I you know, I don't know where it's come from. You know, it could have come from the idea that they do want to lean into this kind of more it girl kind of moment, if you will, or it might just be that they actually decided that they do want a whole new audience. But as you say, they've kind of like isolated and alienated their current customers, or some of them, by doing that. You know, it kind of makes me feel like, well, maybe they haven't thought about those people, or it could be that those people are just a really small percentage and actually there's tons of the people that would. But as you say, there are already existing brands that people would buy from that have the brand loyalty there. So yeah, will be interesting to see how that unfolds for sure. And then to finish off, I wanted to mention about National Trust TikTok strategy. Now, I haven't seen too much conversation around this actually. I think I've seen maybe one or two people posting about it because they loved it. And I wanted to mention it because I think charities really face the issue of how do we get on TikTok, you know? And we actually seen it with, there was a museum in Birmingham. I can't remember the name of it. It was like a historical museum. And they, I think it was a Black Country museum. It was a few years ago. And they really utilised TikTok. I think they still do now. And they gained like hundreds of thousands of followers. Wow. And that was a fair sort of bit of a different sort of brand that I've seen you using TikTok. And ever since then, we've seen people get on it. We've seen people, you know, charities and stuff like that use it. But National Trust, I would say, is one of the brands I've seen in quite a long time that are sticking to their brand core. They're staying with that kind of tone, but they're using TikTok. So they're kind of taking sometimes a bit more of like a David Attenborough approach, which is like, you know, looking at certain animals and whatnot. But essentially, I think they're showing that it's really important to, yes, embrace trends. So they've used some trending sounds sometimes, but equally they've done things that mean a lot to their brand and they stay within that brand voice. So it is really, really clever to make sure and kind of boost awareness without compromising on charity values. I think National Trust is their kind of demographic. You would probably say, oh, they're probably not on TikTok, but actually National Trust members are the future, you know, they're the future generation. So I think leaning into TikTok is a really great move from them, and something again that is a bit different. I'm sure it's probably some sort of experimentation that someone said, should we give it a go? And you know, they've tried it, but they're gaining a lot of traction from it. And I think if you are working for a charity or a non-profit or something, even just a brand that you would say, oh, our consumer or people who buy from us aren't on TikTok, take inspiration from brands like this, from organizations like this, because you don't have to be the typical sort of brand that would actually use TikTok to use it. Just use it in your own way.
Yeah, and I think that it also lends itself to a conversation we've had previously as well about how people use TikTok. So we've both said if we're going to a new city, going on holiday, looking for something to do at the weekend, maybe I'm thinking of something to do with my family, with my little boy, I'll search TikTok for days out. I'll search, you know, on TikTok for, you know, local days out with a toddler and wherever, or whatever it might be. And I think places like, well, or brands like National Trust with obviously, you know, sites all across the UK, that's something that they could really lean into. And I think that having a really positive and kind of engaged presence on TikTok, leaning into trends where they can, but like you said, not straying too far from their mission and their kind of overall tone of voice is a great way to do that, because people are turning to TikTok a lot to find those sorts of experiences, not just Google. So they can have a good presence on there. It's a really good strategy.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, that's everything for today. So
Fab.
we're done. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Girls in Marketing podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you picked up some fresh insights and maybe even a little inspiration for your next big marketing move. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate us, and leave a review. It really helps us reach more amazing marketers like you. Don't forget to let us know what you thought of today's episode as well. Tag us on social media and follow us for the latest updates, behind the scenes, sneak peeks, and fun marketing chats. We'll be back soon with another installment of trends, updates, and campaigns that are shaping the marketing world right now. Until then, get involved in the conversation on social media and check out our Girls in Marketing membership to join a community of incredibly talented marketers just like you. See you next time.